Turn on. Hi, and I just want to welcome you all tonight to our Facebook Live. We are on tonight with three very special guests. First, if you haven't had a chance to see me on live before, I'm Pastor Jodi, and I'm with the lead pastor with Oxford Nazarene Church. So I'm super glad that you're here. Now, I don't want to give away all the stories, but these guests tonight have walked through incredible experiences. And, they are here tonight to share those with you. We hope to make this broadcast available later for those that aren't able to go live. But I just want to encourage you, if you know some friends tonight who may be still trying to process and work through all the events of this last week, maybe just hit your share on Facebook now and invite your others to just join with us tonight. Because really what this is about and what we are doing here tonight is just really hoping to validate some of the things that you are feeling. For Nova Scotians, we're just over a week processing huge loss and trauma. So we want to just be here together as a community. We want to just connect and learn from each other and really let you know it's okay. As Tyler said earlier, it's okay not to be okay. We hope that you will find in our stories and in the experiences that these guests have shared and in their training and in their lives, a little bit of hope, a little bit of understanding, and that it will be a blessing to you as you navigate these waters. We are definitely facing times that we never have before, with the COVID outbreak and being isolated and then trying to process difficult things. So I'm glad that you're here. My heart is, as I said to these guests as we were preparing, my heart is just to be a help and a support to you in your journey. Everybody's at different places, and yet we are all kind of one. So here's what I'd like to ask you to do before we get started. If you wouldn't mind just putting down in the comments below on Facebook where you're listening in from. I find it really cool if we can look after and see that even though we are separate and even though sometimes we feel alone, really, we are able to connect in this really interesting way. So just let me know in the comments below where you're listening in from. And again, share this with others that they may too be encouraged. And now I won't go on any longer. I want to kick it to our first guest tonight, which is Reverend Dr. Linda Yates. Now, just a little intro on Linda. She's a United Church pastor, recently retired. She was pastoring 5 churches in the Musquodoboit area. And in addition to what she experienced in her pastoral role, she achieved her doctorate in ministry with a focus on, Linda, I think you said it was death, self-awareness, and spirituality. So she's done a lot of research in grief and in mourning and that process. And if that wasn't enough, Linda has walked through trauma and mass killing situations with Nova Scotians. So Linda, would you tell us a little bit about what you have experienced? And we'd like to really learn from you tonight.
Well, thanks for the introduction. And thank you very much, Jodi, for your care of the community and for inviting me to come and be a part of this with your other 2 guests. I look forward to learning too. So I was ordained into the Musquodoboit Valley in 1999 and had been there for 6 years, then did some pastoring in the city at an urban setting, but really missed rural ministry. So in 2014, I decided to go back to the Musquodoboit Valley, but because of lack of clergy, they had joined 2 pastoral charges together to make the 5. So I had known most of the people that I served for well over 16 years, and many of them were my friends, and it was a very close relationship. So I was so the second time I was there, I was probably there for about 2 months, and then I got a call from somebody in the community who said, "You'd better go down to the ward house, it's on fire." Which would have been traumatic all by itself, even if nobody got hurt, because that house was on the Old Garsborough Road was the welcoming place for 40, 50 years of everyone in the community. You could never go there that there wasn't somebody dropping in. And Ida was a matriarch of the community, one of those really wise women. She was the organist in the church. Her daughter was the church secretary. Just really well-known and beloved people in the community. So I waited with Christine, who's a church secretary. Her parents lived in the house. And as the night unfolded, just realized that something awful was unfolding, because there were more police cars than I've ever seen in my life, tons of fire engines, and the wards could not be located. So as the night unfolded, and the church people, God love them, there's nothing like a church community. I call it the ministry of cookies. I mean, they all knew what to do. They opened up a nearby church. They opened it up so firefighters could come in, or anybody who needed a cookie. And we brought the family over. We waited and waited and waited. And then finally, as the night went on, we realized that the grandson of the wards, who had been suffering with a mental illness, had killed them. Had beaten them to death, and then set the place on fire. So that would be Ida, her husband Bill, which would have been Cody's grandparents, and also his mother Anne. So that the community had never experienced anything like that before. And so the next, I'd say probably my next 5 years in some ways was really helping the community to kind of walk with that. And of course, Christine had taken a leave of absence, but then she came back to the church. And I don't know that there was ever a day we were working together that those homicides weren't also in the room with us. Mm-hmm. So it was a process of learning and walking with them and just loving them and trying to work with them as they made meaning. So, in terms of how people were affected, I think your other guest, Jane, will be speaking about proximity and how people are connected to tragedies. But I don't think there was a single person in the Muscatine Valley who wasn't affected in some way, right? Because of how well beloved the people were, how well known they were, and because of the nature of what happened. And of course, Cody was found not guilty by reason of mental incapacity. And so the family also, every single year to this day, has to meet him in a courtroom, really, where they assess his capacity to be back in the community. And he's back in the community, as I understand it. So not that particular community, but, so there's all kinds of mixtures and feelings around that. I think as I think about how people handled it, you asked me, I think the question you asked me is how people move through this, and it depends on your proximity. So for people who were in the midst of it, like Christine, it is the depths of pain, right? Just unbelievable pain, unbelievable suffering, but just incredible resilience as well, watching her support her family and watching the community support them, really. Mm-hmm. Then she also had to manage the outcome of that and to support the other people in that, because there's minors involved, so they stayed with her. And then managing, trying to dodge all the media, and then have all the rituals that we normally have, like funerals and those kinds of things. So that was the experience in Muscatine. And sorry.
So really, with what you have experienced, Nova Scotians in a small community going through really, really challenging times, and you have seen the resiliency. And you know that there's so many different levels and times and stages, in the grieving process. I think one thing people wonder, and you and I talked about this earlier, is what can they expect in the days ahead? Like, people want to say, somebody tell me, what's the path to me feeling better? Or, what am I going to experience? Why don't you share a little bit on that?
Well, I think, one of the things that I think about is, well, I'll tell you something that happened today. So if we think about Christine, for example, the church secretary, who was in the midst of that whole trauma, I got a text from her this morning, and she was telling me that, reminding me that it was the anniversary of my dad's death. He died this day last year, actually. And I just was blown away by that, because if you can imagine somebody who in her first 2 years just trying to get through the day, right? Just trying to find something in the day to hang on to, just to try to figure her way forward. But now she's in the space where she is empathetic in terms of thinking about other people, thinking about me, right? Like I was so touched by that after all of her loss, that she reached out to me to wonder how I'm doing today, right? So that's 5 years later, and that is a person of resiliency. So by and large, I think people handle things, they revert to this coping mechanisms that they've always had. So if you are a person who has some resiliency, you can be resilient. I think it also depends on the supports that you have. One of the things that was really interesting to me was, and I know that from my research, is that if people are, once you experience a trauma like that and you're in the middle of it and you've lost somebody, even if it's somebody who you haven't lost in a terribly traumatic way, right, your reality becomes different than everybody else's. And it's hard to imagine that the world goes on, like it's because it seems like there's two separate worlds. So the people who are peripherally attached can move on. But what I noticed with them is that they would get very upset when they saw where the house was, and began to complain about that to the authorities. So why aren't they fixing this house, right? So I think, and in terms of my own work, I think what happens is people are reminded of the trauma and their feelings around it, whereas the families are constantly reminded. They're in the midst of it. But if you're on the outside of it, and you go by something like that, then you are reminded again and again. And that's going to be happening in those communities because there's 5 houses, right? And those built markers of the community, are really important to people. So even if you're peripherally involved and say, okay, well, I'm kind of through this in terms of my own grieving, every time you see those places, you will be reminded, right? So I don't think we're ever through it. And people kind of go back and forth, right, in terms of their own grieving. But by and large, people, they'll all be different. I think we've discussed that before, right? I mean, I don't know if I'm through it, to be truthful. I mean, I got to tell you, I have been dreading this to a certain extent because I have been reliving my own losses during those weeks, right? So there's a lot of flashbacks that have come back for me. So, I have healed through what was a very traumatic ministry for me. But here I am today doing some grieving, right? So
that's right.
So like it's not a smooth course, but you can find a day where you find some joy in the light. Find but it's not a smooth path.
And I think we may get into that a little bit with Tyler. Like for a lot of people in Nova Scotia, if they have experienced any kind of trauma. This is 16 locations. It was multiple families, multiple communities. There's so many chances that at some level, in some way, it is brought old traumas fresh. And now there's the mix of COVID. There's the emotional struggles with separation, and there's all the fear. And then there's new traumas. So really, people have to give themselves space. And I'm just so proud of every person listening in because they're taking some steps and sharing this to try to journey through it. And it's not easy. It's so many multiple different fronts. And sorry, go ahead.
Can I add one thing? I don't want to take any more time from your other guests because it's really important to hear what they say. One of the most brilliant things I did, but it was something that was an act of desperation in some ways, is I realized that I had to tell the entire story to somebody who would hold it confidential. And really, for me, it was like 20 years worth of relationships with some of these people, right? So I went to the Atlantic School of Theology, one of my previous professors, whose name is also Jodi, but it's a man, and said, Jodi, can I just have an hour of your time, right? I just feel like I'm going to explode if I don't tell this story from my perspective. So I guess I would just call it emotional, psychological, spiritual vomiting. He just kind of let me talk for an hour and a half. And then at the end of it, because I was speaking to him minister to minister, I said, do you have any advice for me? And I was just, I was weeping and I was exhausted. And he said, don't let them move past it too fast. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, bring it up name it, right? Refer to it in time, because it has a piece in time, right? Oh, when the wards died, right? In this case, it would be when there was the mass killing, right? Because the community is framing itself anyways, but if you don't name it, they don't have their chances to grieve.
That's right.
In your church meetings or other meetings, check in with people and don't let them move past it fast. So the very first meeting we had was like 3 months later, and I felt like people were kind of wanting to move. Okay, we're done with that now. So I just said at the beginning of the meeting, how is everyone doing with the ward homicides? How are they feeling? And there was silence, and then one guy who was really kind of tough guy, armed forces, and just really, he said, I am devastated, right? And then he talked about how he's feeling, and he had tears, and then everybody did. And I feel like that was one of the best pieces of advice I had, is to name it and don't let the community go past it too fast. Right?
That's really great advice, Linda. Thank you. And so for everyone listening, make a note of that and really chew on that tonight. You don't have to rush through all that you're feeling, and find someone to really be able to talk to get it out so we don't stuff it down. Thank you, Linda. And I want to move on to Jane. Now, for those of you who have heard of the shootings in Columbine, Jane comes from Colorado, from Littleton, Colorado. She is actually a director of youth ministries. And so you tell she's got a little bit of crazy in there. And when she's not with the kids, you'll find that she's working on her master's degree in ministry. But in addition to those things, she was a young child when the Columbine events took place. And her whole life has been framed with that kind of in the background and in the culture that she's lived in. But now, if you can imagine, I was just shocked when we began to talk a little bit. She didn't live through that once or twice again, but in fact, 7 mass shootings in her scope within like a small radius to where she has grown up. So I don't want to take any more of her time. I want you to hear a little bit from Jane and her story. Jane, thank you for coming. And just before I actually kick it to you, I meant, for those of you who appreciated all that Linda shared, Dr. Linda Yates, why don't you give some love if you're listening? I want to see the hearts to say that you appreciated Linda and all that she shared. And now we'll kick it over to you, Jane.
Yeah, first I just want to say thank you to Linda. Something that just stood out the most is like in coming on this, it's like, yeah, you're kind of forced to relive some of those harmful, hurtful memories. And so to just hear that there's camaraderie in that was helpful, just because, yeah, there's been that coming up for me as well. So as Jodi said, I am from Colorado, and so Columbine High School is about a 15-minute drive from my childhood home. Actually, my best friends went to Columbine growing up, so it's very close. And yeah, that was a
wow.
Yeah, just in something I grew up with, and it's just like, yeah, you know about it. It's not really talked about that much. That was in 1999. I was only 2 at the time, almost 2, like less than 2. And so the next shooting, if you will, happened in 2010 when I was 12. I was in middle school, and I was there. And it wasn't at my own middle school. It was at a neighboring middle school that I'd take the bus there, wait for them to get out of school, and then I would take a different bus home. It was like a whole process. But in that time, the shooter actually came up to me, spoke to me, and he was very infatuated with the school. He went there as a student, but and spoke to me and my friends, went on his way. And then once school let out, that's kind of when everything broke out. Luckily, I had gotten on the bus by that time, and was safe. However, with that, our bus driver was brave enough to get off the bus to help detain him while police showed up. And something that I was kind of telling Jodi about earlier was in just reading about all of the events that have happened in Nova Scotia I was kind of thinking like, why me? Like no one died at the shooting I was at. But with that, like I know trauma firsthand. I know I was only 12 when it happened. And unfortunately was on a bus that was parked right in front of the school. So we were forced to kind of watch everything unfold. And as a 12-year-old, you don't know what to do in those situations. You can't help but look, you probably shouldn't, all these things. But with that, kind of following along that story, a few years later, I was asked to testify in court against the shooter, which in and of itself was another kind of traumatizing event. Yeah. Like Linda was saying, was like, you have to kind of revisit it. And it's like, well, there goes any healing that it almost felt like any healing you had done was just kind of thrown out the window, which isn't true. And with that kind of dealing, at the same time, there was another shooting in 2012. That was a mass shooting at the Aurora Theater shooting, if you are familiar with it.
I remember that.
Yeah. So yeah, since 2010 to last year, I want to say that there's been maybe five or six, including the one that I was at, just in the greater Denver area, keeping in mind that all these different locations are within about a half-hour drive of my childhood home. And yeah, a couple of them were at some high schools that I knew good friends at. And the most recent one was last year in May. I think it was May 7th, at the STEM school. So really just having that kind of experience of not only seeing this evil act firsthand, but also experiencing that it's referred to as secondary trauma of just being near an event, which then obviously kind of opens some old wounds and stuff like that. Yeah.
So you and I we talked a little bit about that, the difference between, the being right there. So I guess we could liken that in Nova Scotia now to being a direct family member or immediately impacted by what happened last Sunday versus almost like our greater community is in the secondary kind of trauma. So why don't you help people understand a little bit of how there's some differences and similarities in how we're processing, depending on, I think the word was proximity that Linda used, but.
Yeah. The thing that kind of comes to mind for everyone to just kind of consider is this idea of radical acceptance. It's something that I've had to pray through a lot in the last 10 years. Radical acceptance of accepting what we can't control and what we can control. So accepting like, yeah, I either experienced this, maybe saw something horrific, or have been hearing about something horrific, or know someone who is dealing with this immense amount of trauma and pain, and kind of just being okay with that, being okay with that's the reality that you're living in, but also kind of paying attention to the things that you can control, and you can control like what media you're consuming. Maybe the news is too much, you need to turn it off. That's definitely something that as a 12-year-old I didn't know how to vocalize that. I didn't know how to tell my parents like you need to stop talking about this, or you need to just turn the news off, or in times where I did need to talk about it, I didn't know how to vocalize like, hey, this is what I'm dealing with right now. I think the most important thing is to recognize that everyone deals with trauma differently, and how you are dealing with trauma is unique, and maybe you feel like you shouldn't be as affected by it as you are, but it's okay that you are. I think those are just some things that, like, if I could go back in time and tell my little middle school 12-year-old self, like, it's okay that you're dealing with this. It's okay that you are more affected by it than this person who was in the same situation. and to vocalize those things and to tell people your needs and to invite Jesus into the healing as well. Invite the Lord into the healing, because trust me, I tried to will myself to like be healed, and it wasn't until I really let the Lord in that I started to see that healing process start. And to be honest, I'm still in the healing process, and it could be a lifelong thing, which is okay as well.
So Jane, I actually hear a lot of good points that I just want to really emphasize in what you shared. One is for sure, we're all still on the journey. I don't think anybody that's listening should expect that, check, healed, got it. For all of us, there's going to be times, look at what happened in Nova Scotia. What was it, 3 or 4 days later when that second alert came out? I mean, immediately that just tweaked everybody. It brought a sense of fear, and it means something may happen in the future, and we may have dealt with some of the anger and some of the questions and some of the faith grappling. We may feel like, oh wow, I've kind of landed, I'm doing well, and still things, because we are people. We're human. We're on a journey, and I'm excited for Tyler to share. He wasn't sure tonight, do we want him to be part of this panel, but I really want to jump, and this is actually a really great segue into hearing your story, and then we can come back. But Tyler, it really emphasizes the journey. But before we go to him, I just know that people have been really amazed to hear, Jane, what you have lived through, and that you are, bringing Jesus into the healing and serving and on this journey that you're on to help teenagers. So let's hear some love for Jane, the best virtual way we can do that, and that's to drop some hearts. We want her to feel our love in this moment, just for being willing to share from the US with us, and we'll have some more questions for her. And while we're getting ready to go to Tyler, if you have a question for Linda or Jane, or just a general question, you can post them in the comments. Hokey smoky, we're getting lots of hearts, Jane. Lots of love happening out there on Facebook. But I encourage you, post a question, and we'll try to come back to it and catch a few of your questions as we come to the end. So be thinking of a question, and you can post it anytime. And now for Tyler, some of you, many of you will know Pastor Tyler Hobbs, who is part of our team at Oxnaz, our youth pastor. He's a ministry student. And I think I was going to say ministerial or ministry, and I kind of mashed those two words together, but that's Tyler. He's a mash of everything. Tyler, if you didn't know, he served 7 years as a combat engineer. So he is a military veteran. And he was in the North. He had a bit of time in the US, but most notably, he was in Afghanistan. And with that, Tyler was discharged with a diagnosis of PTSD and some depression and anxiety that I think kind of was coupled with that. And so Tyler is just such an example of a person who can love Jesus, as Jane and Linda, and yet, be in this messy place of processing traumas and healing and journeying and all that comes. And then when new things happen, like what happened last week, we had some conversations about that affected him. So again, there's lots of hopefully encouragement and validation as you hear these stories. There's no normal. There's no perfect timing to heal. There's no right path, but there's just talking and being community and working together. So Tyler, why don't you share a little bit of how you have worked through healing from some traumas that you've experienced?
Thank you, Jodi. So I've been, it's been a long road. I released from the military in 2009. My tour was in 2005. I got to say the first 4 years were very dark, very painful. I didn't really get along with anyone, including my wife. And I got to the point where, because I wasn't handling the trauma, I wasn't talking about it. I wasn't letting it out. I wasn't processing it. I was retired, so I wasn't really doing anything. Combine that with the spinal injury and the head injury, it was tough to do anything. So I was at home a lot like we are now with COVID-19, and I wasn't doing much. And I found that I was resting a lot, but it wasn't true rest. It was kind of false rest. I would fill my time with video games or internet or movies. If I was sitting down, then I was trying to look at a screen. I wasn't really even thinking about everything that was making me angry or depressed or anxious. I would feel it. There was like a constant tension in my chest, but I wouldn't allow myself to think about it. I wouldn't identify it. And that's what Dr. Linda was talking about when she was kind of talking about in a community sense, to identify the day or identify the event, to name it and say it. It's the same with emotions. This tension in my chest, I wasn't naming it. I knew it was there because it was always there. And I didn't name it. I didn't deal with it until I figured out true rest. And true rest was actually making some time in the day at some point, because like I said, I was at home all day, a lot like we are now, to sit down where it was quiet and think about the tension in my chest. Why exactly is it there? I couldn't just say it was there because of the event. Okay, why is it really there? What about that event is causing that tension, that anxiety, that depression, that fear, that anger, that sadness? What was it? So I had to identify the emotion. And then secondly, I had to say why it was there. Well, it was because of this specific thing. And it was only when I sat down to take time to be quiet that I could actually come to any kind of conclusions. Because yeah, I was resting all day, like with screens or on the phone or whatever, but I wasn't doing any true rest. Like it got to the point where I had to go for a run or go work out just so that I could feel rested, because the rest I was doing wasn't making me feel rested. I was binge watching stuff, and at the end of it, I felt tired and exhausted, even though I wasn't doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
So true rest was vital. And one other thing that I found was one of two other things that I found was really helpful was finding others and connecting with others that experienced similar things or even the same things, and talking with them about it. Just like that formed a bond, that formed new friendships, that formed new relationships that were very important to me, that I coveted, that I needed to connect with these people. After I realized they had gone through similar things or the same thing, I now felt like I could connect with someone again, because I wasn't connecting with anybody, going through just trying to sprint through my day, filling it with whatever and living with tension in my chest and not dealing with it. So finding others that have dealt with it. And the only way I found others was by talking about what happened to me. And then others would say, you know what? Yeah, man, I was overseas in 2001 and this happened to me. And all of a sudden, bam, right there, right then, a relationship was forged. And those were so helpful, but none of those would have happened if I hadn't started to talk about what I was feeling and why I was feeling it. And the last thing, yeah, is it made it easier. And I would feel false if I didn't say it, but Jesus made it easier. Praying to him, talking to him, getting mad at him. Like, you can get mad at God. Go ahead. He's got big shoulders. Get angry, say whatever you need to say to God. He can take it. And I had to do that. I had to get mad at him. And it was those times that I actually had some breakthrough. I had to get sad at him. I had to let him know how much I was hurt. And I had to ask him the tough questions, like, where were you when it happened? And it wasn't until I asked those questions that I could see the answers. Because not asking the questions and just living with them in my head instead of actually asking them to him I couldn't see the answers until I asked him the questions, yelled the questions at him, screamed the questions at him, cried the questions at him. I'd say those were the top three things that helped me get through. And just like, Jane and Linda were saying, you never go back to your normal once you've experienced something like this. And so just a heads up, in the future, when other things come, you're going to feel your old wounds again.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I've been feeling all week. And, and I've been getting anxious again. I've been getting angry again. And I've been misplacing it. I've been snapping at the kids a little bit, and I got to catch myself because, okay, no, they had nothing to do with this.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to catch yourself again.
Mm-hmm.
Your wounds will be reopened every time something else tragic happens. Just be ready for that.
I love it. You're the strong military guy and yet so willing to be real and tender. I think people listening, you need to give Tyler some love right now. Here's some hearts for our Tyler. I'm listening and just jotting down. I'm trying to look and listen and everything, but you guys have said so many great things, and I kind of started to recap Jane, and then my head gets in different, directions. But, just to remind you guys some of these things. It's okay to be angry. It is okay to feel what you feel. You need to name it. You need to share it with somebody. You need to just go through your journey and recognize that if you think you've got to put on a brave face, look at the tough guy here saying, he's sharing his truths with you. He loves Jesus and he asked questions, and he is a strong leader, and yet he is real to say it's still a journey of healing. And I've never been afraid to share my humanity with you. Last night for me was my emotional night of kind of overload. I needed to have a bath by myself and cry to my bestie, who I think might be listening and had to listen to the other end. She's my person to talk to. And there's healing in talking. And when we name it and we reach out and we find others and we don't stuff and we're real and we go through together, I think that's the beauty of living life, and faith absolutely is a piece of it. And for those of you, I'm not sure if Linda and Jane that you listened, but last Sunday just passed, I just took that question head on. Why, God? And the point that I was making in that is I looked at a guy in the Bible, a prophet, Habakkuk, and he wrestled with God. It landed in the Bible. I think it's okay. But I said it was a direction of looking towards God with the questions. Like, it's okay to have the conversation and fight it out, just like a parent that you love. When you don't understand, you're processing your anger and why, but you still are towards them with the position of your heart. So, I just hope that everybody listening has that community, has someone, and processes these things together. Been lots of good things popped up. I don't know, Tyler, do you want to take a minute to peek on the feed and see if there's any questions? And while you're looking to see if there's any questions, Linda or Jane, does anything from what we're saying pop up that I want to give you a chance to jump back in?
I guess in terms of thinking about faith, I think there seemed to be, in my experience, there were two ways that people went in terms of spirituality. Right? It seemed to me that people went into a phase of, I don't believe in God because God would not allow something like this to happen. And but there were often people who were kind of what I would call borderline atheist agnostic anyway. So it was more or less fulfillment for them of what they had already known. For many other people, I think that it matured their faith to a certain extent. They may have had a childlike image of God. Well, God's like this puppet master, and if you're good things happen to you. But in wrestling with this, they had to flesh that out, right? And the great thing about being a pastor is you get to do that with them, particularly Sunday by Sunday. But I reminded them that there are many places in the Bible, and my particular favorite when I have had those dark place is Jesus on the cross saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? You know, I feel like if Jesus has a moment where he just feels like, I don't know what's happening here. It's awful. Where are you, God? We're all allowed those moments. And that within that though, there is the promise of just suspending your faith enough to say, I'm open to what happens, right? And so that was my observation, and I really felt that the people who had an active faith life and reached out with people really did better. You know, like I really felt that they kind of, I think it is a very big help. I wouldn't want to tell people what to believe exactly, because I think that's their own journey with God. But it did seem to me that people that were intentional about it really moved through it in healthier ways. Right? It didn't mean they didn't have days of despair or re-traumatization, but that really was helpful.
Absolutely. And Jane, I'm interested in Colorado. I think for us in Nova Scotia, I mean, Linda shared about 5 years ago, a 3-person kind of multiple killing, and a community that's now affected again by this. But this is the biggest mass shooting in Canadian history. This is not anything we were in any way expecting or prepared for. It's very, very out of the box for us to even grapple with. I think people listening are probably just amazed to think how could you live through 7? And what does that do to people? And I can understand people here questioning God right now. I mean, that's exactly what I talked about last week, but where does that land on people in such a diverse, a large city with that much trauma multiple times?
Yeah. So the majority of those have been, I think there was 2 people who passed in a couple of them, and 1 person who passed in a couple of them, and then the Aurora Theater shooting, I want to say that it was up in the high teens, probably about 17 to 19 people passing. And so with all of that, it's a lot of confusion. And that's okay to be confused. And it's honestly kind of sad to say that, like, I would go so far as to say it, that like Coloradans, Denverites, if you will, like it's no longer that surprising when it happens, which is really heartbreaking. I mean, the Vegas shooting back in 2017 as well. Like all these things, it's horrific in the moment. And yeah, we're always shocked by the like capacity for evil in this world. But something I think to keep in mind is that God's goodness is just, it overshines that capacity for evil in our world.
I've been really amazed in these last days. Even with the COVID, when it started, seeing teddy bears in the window, sidewalk chalk on the hearts. I don't think Nova Scotians have ever shared so many flags. My husband and I, like I said, we were going for a little drive, and just house after house, a flag, a tribute. I think in the challenges, you see the good in humanity. It's in such stark contrast to such deep, dark evil. And I love seeing the community like wake up to needing each other and serving each other. And I always say, and those listening, I mean, that's my heart, is that we wouldn't be the church inside the wall, and those people, like, very reason in talking is it's because we are there for each other. It's this journey together. That's actually even our vision, which you and Linda may not know, Jane, but it's to see our community awakened and transformed by love. Like, this is the time to love each other, right? It's just as simple as that. Grow in love for God and others. And so that's cool. And I will stop my little getting on preaching, because this wasn't my segment, and I want to get to questions. And I know there's a few questions. Is there, Tyler?
Yes.
Okay.
We have one question that says, do you find people sometimes get uncomfortable if and when you bring up those horrendous times. It's super important to talk about it, and often people have a need to shove it in a deep, dark corner and leave it there. But do you find it uncomfortable when you bring it up?
Oh, absolutely. I've been diagnosed with PTSD too. I also was a first responder with a fire department in the Muscataba Valley as well, right? So there was, quite a bit of secondary trauma associated with that, and lots of other things too. But of course, right? Of course, I mean, we kind of course we're uncomfortable, and of course people will be comfortable in the room. Just to go back to talking about scripture again, I mean, one of the things that Jesus does is whenever he's presented with a demon, which I understand to be mental illness, an ancient way of talking about mental illness, first thing he does is name it, right? And the minute he names it, it loses its power, right? And I think that you were also talking about that too, Tyler, right? It's just that, when you name it, things lose their power. And yes, people will be uncomfortable, but developing those skill sets around taking a deep breath and just accepting where people are with that. But you have the right to be able to name your truth and your experience in that. You don't have the right to draw it out of other people, because that they may not be able to handle it. They may not be able in a space where they're willing to do that, but you can create a safe space for them and to do some really deep listening yourself, right? And that's the best gift you can give anybody. And it's a sacrificial gift too, because it's hard to do, right?
How another question that came in I see here is, how do you talk to our children about these things to help them through fear? And just before we give that question to someone, I just want to let folks know that are listening. We actually had a therapist on with moms. We did it on Sunday night, and we invited some moms to join, and we did that very session, and it's posted a lot of stuff in Oxnaz Kids, where she talked and trained and helped parents to go through how do you have those difficult conversations. So before I forget, I just want to let you know that if you go to the kids, or maybe I can take some of those things and post them on our Facebook tonight. I'll perhaps do that. She sent some materials that she shared after on preschoolers and what to, keep it up to one sentence. And in elementary students, she talked a lot about making sure that you keep the visuals away, monitoring screen time and boundaries, which I know, Jane, you talked about, really important with teenagers and anyone, but especially with teenagers. Limit the media and limit the graphics and stuff like that. So I will try to take some of the resources from our kids page for parents, and I'll try to post a post on our Oxnaz page later tonight. But Linda, or does anyone have any training that they would like to add, anything about parenting kids through these kinds of situations that you just thought you'd like to share on that?
I have some thoughts because I was a kid when this trauma happened to me.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to kind of talk to your kids about the free will that we are given. And yeah, in our faith, like we know that like we have the capacity to sin and to do great evil, but we also have the capacity to do great good. So just it gives you an opportunity to kind of answer that age-old question of why do bad things happen to good people, and kind of explore that with your family and your beliefs and in what the Bible tells us and all these things. That's kind of just one thing. And to also explain that no one is born inherently bad, and it is things that maybe things that happen to them that cause them to then act out in a certain way, or to have these incidences of performing great evil. And so to just emphasize the importance of being kind to everyone and loving everyone with the best, to your best capability, and knowing that you don't know what anyone is going through or what they have gone through that could have them act in a certain way.
It's a great time to teach the love of Jesus. That's at the very heart of what we believe, isn't it? Mm-hmm. If there's any more questions, you got to get it in quick. If you've got another question for one of our panelists, but while you're thinking, I would like to give them a chance to form a final thought to share. Linda, if you were to kind of to sum it up in one takeaway that you want people to have from your heart tonight, what would it be?
I think that the number one lesson that I learned and that I observed in terms of healing is just showing up, right? Like you don't have to do anything spectacular. I mean, I know it's different because we're in COVID times, but there are also ways of showing up in COVID times. But that the biggest thing that made a difference to the family and to people who were most affected by the homicides was the time people took to just be with them, right? To just show up, to just listen, bring food, whatever it is that people want to do. Like if you have an impulse to check it out and to just show up for people, right? Like you don't have to figure it out, right? And also to show up for yourself, to consider yourself in that lineup. I'd also like to go back to the piece around the children, if I could. Is that
Absolutely.
one
Sure.
of the things that I really like to think about with kids is do a lot of listening around what they're thinking. Like, so just an awful lot of listening. And like you said, just keep the details kind of very minimal, but answer questions with age appropriate details. But I love Mr. Rogers, who of course was a Presbyterian minister. And he would always say, when something terrible happens and you see it in the news or somebody does something that you feel is terrible, look at all the helpers, right? Like look at all of the people who are coming towards a situation and then helping get the kids to name that. Like I've done that in church, right? Because they, of course, happened in the middle of their community. Well, who came, do you think, to help, right? Like how might people be living out the love of God that way? Well, the ambulance people, well, the people who made the cookies. I mean, there's all these other people. I mean, it's very easy to get focused on that person who did the thing, but we forget to help the kids to expand and see that the vast majority of people are good, right?
Awesome. Excellent. And actually there's great points about asking them questions. I'm not the therapist, so I did the best what I remember, but asking your kids questions and pulling it out, you nailed it. And thank you, Linda, for all of your thoughts tonight and all of that you've contributed to the discussion. Jane, if you were to think of, a tidbit of encouragement, just something that you want to, maybe you have a passion for youth, maybe it's a young listener or someone who's struggling through this and hasn't experienced it before, what encouragement do you want to leave people with tonight?
Just that there's light in the darkness. And right now it seems like there's a lot of darkness around us.
Mm-hmm.
Take time literally every single night to say, write them down, text them to a friend, have a friend hold you accountable to write down 3 things that you were thankful for, or 3 things that made you smile throughout the day. Because that's what you need right now in these moments of this trauma is fresh. And it's very easy to kind of just be kind of engulfed by that darkness. But there is light. There's always light that overcomes the darkness. And you need to sometimes force yourself. And sometimes those days are like, I saw a dog on a walk today and that was it. And that's okay. Like if that's the one thing. But to name those small things that you allowed the Lord to kind of come in and let you see light in the darkness.
Yeah. And Tyler, while you're thinking of a final thought, I see it was mentioned in the comments, just to keep the horrific details that adults talk about, don't have those conversations with kids listening, and the pictures, the graphics, keep that away. Be very careful to protect what goes into their mind and their ears. Use wisdom. Thank you for that, Eileen. And Tyler, thank you for being so real. I know I want you guys listening to know it takes a lot. I remember the first time from the pulpit, I talked about the journey that I've had with anxiety and just shared my journey with fear live last Tuesday night. And people think, oh, you're a pastor. I thought that meant you would not have any problems. Wrong. I'm human too. And so I really thank you for being real, that to share the journey. And that's certainly the path that I believe in, because when people think that they shouldn't have anger, that's when they stuff it. They shouldn't feel trauma. It's not their own family, or they shouldn't be acting this way. It's all these I shouldn't. they don't validate their own feelings, they don't talk, they stuff, and that's not what we want people to do, to be healthy and to work through things and to pour things out to God. So I want to thank you for being real and just ask you to have your kind of final word that you want to leave with people tonight as encouragement or wisdom. Sum it up, knock it home, brother.
Yeah, no pressure. One thing I've noticed, and my mom's always been kind of pushing this on me too, actually. When it comes to, I'm just going to say, as a youth minister, when it comes to teens or younger, you don't need to probe. You don't need to probe. You just need to make the space.
Yeah.
And it needs to be without a screen, because the screen is going to take up their thinking capacity. Make the space. Do something that they enjoy, but with them, whether it's playing catch, whether it's coloring, whether it's going for a walk, just make the space. Or it's just sitting there if your teenager's older with a coffee or a tea, and just sit. And there's something about silence as a parent or as a friend. If you're sitting with a friend near 6 feet or over Zoom or whatever you're doing during COVID, be okay with silence. Just sit, and you're just making the space, and just let them think. Be okay with silence when you're with them. Don't be okay with the silence when you're without them. If they're not texting when they normally would, if your child's not messaging or emailing or talking to you when they normally would, then that's a bit of an issue. But if you're with them and they're silent and they're just coloring or drinking their drink or whatever, or just walking, just be okay with that silence when you're with them. They'll talk when they've got it all formulated in their heads. They'll talk. Same with your friend. If you're on Zoom and you're with your friend, just you feel awkward because it's quiet. Don't. Just sit back, relax, and wait. They'll talk or they won't, but in the end, just having that time with you when they're silent, it didn't matter. It's just that they were with you and you made the space.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I want to see some love going up for these three awesome guests tonight. And I want to offer a prayer to close, but I have a couple of things that I want to mention to all you guys listening before we pray and close. I have been asked to do a similar thing, just really talking about grief. So that's going to be coming up in the days ahead. If you want to stay connected to what's happening, make sure on our Oxford Church of the Nazarene Facebook page, make sure you like and follow and are getting the notifications so you can be part of these things that we're doing to help you and to support you. Little things that we post are meant to encourage you. We're not just saying come, we're trying to just be there to bless you. And if you have found this to be helpful and these stories have helped to validate your feelings and teach you and help you on the journey, please make sure you like and share and put this out there broadly so more people can benefit from the experiences that Jane, Linda, and Tyler shared tonight. And last of all, on our Facebook, if you would like to be part of our email list, just hit that send message, throw your email in, and we will make sure we email you so you can keep in touch again with what we're doing. But I just want you to know that if I was to sum up my kind of thoughts in one thing, of course, as the pastor tonight, I just want you to know that Jesus loves you. And wherever you are through this coping with COVID and processing the mass shootings that happened, wherever you're at with fear and anger and joy and faith and questions, his love is enough to meet you right there. And where it's appropriate, my heart is just to help and journey with you through that. So thank you guys for joining us tonight. Thank you for listening. And let me just close with a prayer of blessing tonight. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you are good even despite the dark things that happen in our world. We thank you for the love of Jesus. We thank you for the hope that shines through the darkness and light, and what we see in the goodness and resilience of people that are stepping up in our community. I thank you, Father, for each one that shared their story tonight, for Linda and how she is ministering to those grieving and has walked through these valleys, and even still as a person is processing and living her own life on her journey. I pray blessings for her and her family. And also for Jane. I can't even imagine the people in Colorado and what they've lived through so many different times. I thank you for people like Jane that are out there ministering hope and light into difficult circumstances. God, I pray a blessing over her. And I thank you for Tyler and our team at Oxnaz. And I pray, God, that you will use all of these times and ways that we connect across the media while people are separated and across the internet. I pray that you'll use them to help people know that they are loved and they are valued and they have worth, and that you will help them as they journey to heal, that Jesus died for us to be healed, and you died, Jesus, to give us abundant and good life. So, Father, I pray that you will meet people tonight where they are, that they will walk away from this time just sensing your Holy Spirit's closeness, feeling your presence, and encouraged and validated. And God, that they just know that you are with them each and every day. May the peace of Christ rest upon them this night and all their days. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Amen. God bless you. Thank you for joining us. This will now and just take a few minutes, and it will be posted live, or the live will turn into a regular video, and you will be able to watch it again and share it. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to our special guests tonight.
Thank
God
you.
bless you.
For having me.